Hello and welcome to the Cardiff Met Sports Coaching Hub podcast.
I'm Ollie Lum.
And I'm Mike Castle.
We're here to bring you insights around all of the latest cutting-edge research within coach education and practice.
You can stay up to date with all of our latest episodes through the links in the podcast description below.
We hope you enjoy the episode. Hello and welcome back to the Cardiff Met Sports Coaching Hub podcast. Today we are joined by Ludvig Rasmussen to talk about creativity within sports coaching. Manuel, our usual director, is also with us to add his expertise on creativity. But Ludvig, first off, how are you today?
Hi, both of you. Thank you. I'm excellent.
Good. Great to have you with us. And just before we get into the podcast, do you mind just giving a brief background to what you do and where you're working at the moment?
Yeah, sure. And also, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me. It's going to be a blast. It's always interesting to discuss this area of research that both Manuel and I are doing. But yes, first of all, just outside this telephone box I'm sitting in, the students are putting the final details on the semester projects. So it's a busy time here at the Aalborg University. But currently, I'm doing a research project that is funded by UEFA on creativity training in children's sports, children's football, that I know we're going to talk a little bit about later in the podcast. But that has been a real pleasure to have some open-minded coaches to engage with the program we developed and had some preliminary results that we can discuss a little bit later. But otherwise, a lot of the time right now is going to help the students finalize the semester projects in the PBL group work.
Yeah, excellent. So similar to what we're doing at the moment, I guess, Manuel, with those assessments.
It's a busy time on campus with end-of-term assessments and submissions and all the marking that's coming our way, Ollie.
Absolutely. Ludvig, why don't we kind of take a few steps back and talk about how you first got into academia? Like, why did you decide that you wanted to do some research and do a PhD?
Yeah, sure. Well, I did my own bachelor and master. My own background as a student is also here at Aalborg University. And I was enrolled in sports science education. So in my master program, I was part of a cross-disciplinary semester that was focused on creativity research and creativity in theory and practice, like from the general psychological literature and organizational literature on creativity. And together with students from all over Aalborg University, we were introduced to different models and theories and techniques to develop creativity. And we had to use these techniques to come up with a new idea within our own discipline. So coming from sports science, I got very curious about this topic of creativity that we haven't been introduced for it in my own program at sports science, but I started to look into the literature and see how has creativity actually been defined and applied within sports science. And I discovered that there was not that much research about it. This is 10 years ago now, and basically what I could find was some early work by Daniel Mehmet from Germany. And some of his first papers was published at that time. So there was a huge research gap in terms of what is creativity in sports and how can it be developed. So I ended up using this semester to actually transfer some of the more generic creativity literature that we were exposed to this semester and adapting it to football and trying to develop a model based on some creativity nurturing principles and how can we use these in football. And then I was lucky to get one of my fellow students. He coached under 15 football team, and I was able to be a guest coach for his team for a couple of weeks to try out the principles I developed during the previous semester in my master's thesis. And this ended up being the first academic paper I published. The work was good enough to be worked more on after I finished my master, and we found some really intriguing results in terms of this approach ability to or potential to create a safe and autonomy, supportive, and playful environment where the players were less afraid of making mistakes when trying out new things, when attempting difficult techniques, and helping each other develop new solutions. So there was many potentials in terms of what can creativity do in terms of player development, player enjoyment, that was so interesting to look more into. So luckily my supervisor at that time agreed, and there was an open position as a teaching assistant professor that I applied for. I got that one and then I could mature these ideas into a PhD position. So and here I am 10 years later. But that was some of the formative experiences in academia that showed me that the qualitative approach to understanding what are the potentials of applying creativity in coaching practice was it was actually also one of the first times I did a qualitative study, a qualitative project during my 5 years as a student at the university. So that was really an eye-opener for me at that time.
You mentioned this idea of generic ideas of creativity and having to shape that to your own context of sport. Can you talk a bit more about what that looked like, your first understandings or readings of what creativity was?
Yeah, so the main theory or the main approach we were introduced for at this semester was called the creative platform. And it has been used in organizations and in education contexts. And it's the definition of creativity in this model is unlimited application of knowledge. So it's a kind of a original definition in terms of not being person-oriented and not being product-oriented, so to say, but has to deal with how we apply our knowledge. And the idea is that the way we use knowledge in a given context is limited by professional, by cultural, by social dimensions that defines what is the right kind of knowledge to be used in this context. So the creative platform uses different kinds of stimulation techniques or cues with words or pictures or different kinds of tools to create associations to other kinds of knowledge that we don't usually apply in a given context to help us get new ideas. And that was some of the techniques that I tried to transfer into football at that time. Then the model also has 4 principles that can be used to design or promote creative climates or environments. For example, the principle of no experience judgment involves that players, or not players, but that we are limited by fear of making mistakes, fear of looking silly, fear of fooling around, and others' judgment. Mm-hmm. When we do new things or say new things, it's a huge limitation for creativity. So if we can create a more or less judgment-free environment where we don't say no to all ideas because this will not work, then we have a better condition to promote creativity. And then one of the other principles is horizontal thinking, which is about using knowledge from other topic areas to inspire action or ideas within one's main area. Yeah. But there's a few more principles, but that is a general idea. And my first kind of approach to understanding creativity is about how can we reduce the fear of making mistakes using this approach.
Let me just ask one question then. You said that you were working with students from other courses. These issues in, looking silly or feeling uncomfortable in being creative, is this something that you see across other areas, or it was just mainly within our field?
I think, first of all, the students enrolling in this special semester were already somehow interested in creativity. I'm not sure it was a representative sample,
Yeah.
so to say, of other disciplines, because I think people might have been of a more playful and open-minded nature to apply for a cross-disciplinary semester, but it is something that research also shows that the fear of making mistakes is one of the main barriers to creative thinking across fields. But I didn't experience that in the program, because the theory of the creative platform was also so much integrated into practice that each morning we started with half an hour creativity training with different kinds of activities where we had to engage in playful, imaginative fantasy exercises where we helped each other generate many different ideas for those similar to those classical creativity tests or alternative uses tests. What can you use a brick for? What can you use a whatever coffee cup for? And then tons of other kinds of these kind of activities where we engage in creativity training with students from the different disciplines. And that is still something. This approach to creativity training is still something that informs my way of thinking about how to design for creativity, so how to design creativity promoting training activities.
Mm. And this idea of creativity training, is that why you went for action research when you then went to do your PhD? You wanted to do something that really promoted change?
Yeah, well, it has. I think three overall arguments for why it was action research. First of all, there's a kind of the scientific perspective in terms of addressing a gap in the literature. Was the current state of the research at the time of in the beginning of my PhD was the literature was mainly marked by intervention studies, whereas a certain approach to develop creativity was tried out for a period of time, and then creative abilities were measured before and after. But this design, the quantitative design, repeat post testing, it leaves behind some questions about the perspectives of the coaches who participated, the perspectives of the players who participated, and how they actually experienced the new training. It leaves some questions behind about what challenges did the coaches meet when using these things. So that's kind of the scientific argument to include the perspectives and have some more contextualized, in-depth research about what happens when trying to create change and implementing new ideas. In the case of the study we're going to discuss in elite football, youth football, that was like the scientific perspective, and then of course. My research is informed by a pragmatist philosophy of science, and the ambition here is to inspire and to help practitioners break habits, to challenge conventional thinking and dogmatic practices, to liberate people from controlling and harmful practices. And this kind of also informs my research that if in order to make some enhance the chance to make some lasting change, then action research was a relevant approach to do that. And then the final aspect was that before I engaged in the action research process in this local academy in Denmark, I did a qualitative observation and interview study where I talked to all coaches from different age groups in the club, and also the professional team and different actors around the club, and talked to them about their conception about creativity, what it is, why it's important, how it can be applied in coaching, and what they do on an everyday basis to promote creativity. And what I discovered was that there were so many different understandings and views about what creativity is that it's it was mind-blowing. I discovered 15 metaphors of creativity that ranged from something magical to something efficient, an efficient solution. Or is it to deceive the opponent, or is it to transgress cultural norms? Is it to create a choreography that the players follow, or is it like a co-improvisation process where the players interact based on open-ended principles? There were so many ideas that we discovered that it's impossible for coaches to talk about what creativity is without first agreeing this is the way we understand creativity. Then we can start to talk about how we can develop it. So the action research was also a possibility to be more aware of how can we find a common ground to say what is creativity and how can we then start to promote it in the everyday training sessions in the club. And then we stumbled upon a lot of other challenges than just the conceptual one. But there was some groundwork done to understand the context and the many different definitions of creativity that was out there in the club. That was also a background for why to engage in the action research.
Yeah. And Manuel, obviously doing your own action research on creativity, you found similar, didn't you, in terms of how to define it?
Yeah, I think agreeing with what Ludvig was saying about action research is that the value of it is to be able to work with coaches in situ and put the emphasis on the working with individuals. And that action research leans into it and tries to categorize it itself as being collaborative and or democratic, that it's about the ability to work with others. And we can have a conversation about the value of labeling action research as collaborative or democratic, only this or only that. But the fact is that the emphasis is in working with others in their own context. And I think that what we're talking about in terms of creativity, particularly when it comes to break social norms and rules and ways of doing things and exploring the barriers that inhibit either, in your case, Ludvig, athletes, in my case, coaches, to think creatively. I think action research as a design leans itself to educate others to be able to see beyond the things that they usually do. But to be fair to you, Ollie, you also did action research, so you probably can also have some thoughts on this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's interesting you mentioned, I guess, how traditional studies within creativity were done through intervention, but you speak to a lot of people, even within academia, and they struggle to differentiate between intervention and action research. And I think the way you've spoken about understanding the process of getting between that, I guess, your baseline data and your final, I guess, understanding of how creativity is developed is lost, perhaps, in some of those traditional intervention studies where you're talking about really understanding and working with coaches over that course of time and that working with, as Manuel said.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that these intervention studies, they might describe some overall approaches, for example, differential learning or nonlinear pedagogy, but those approaches are described in a more overall generic way, and you lose track of how exactly did the coaches, what were the activities done and the coaching behavior engaged in, and what happened. What happened and what was experienced is quite kind of lost in this. Of course, it's really important also to show the potential of these approaches in terms of developing creative abilities. That should not be neglected at all. But there's also a need for more a closer look at the process and what can we do to help coaches implement more of these kind of activities, because no one knows what happened after the intervention period was over. Of course, I didn't do a follow-up on my action research, so we don't know that either, but at least we got some insight in in the barriers and potentials we discovered during the process.
Let's circle back to, I guess, those issues around defining creativity, because when you went in and actually started to try and change practice, did you set out and define creativity to the coaches, or did you come to a shared agreement around what that was?
I was careful not to be too what do you say, excluding in terms of saying this is creativity and this is not creativity. I try to engage in a dialogue with the coach in terms of what's the continuum we can work on in terms of which kinds of creativity we want to promote. But I had, of course, I was informed by the studies I did while doing the action research. I was simultaneously I was developing a more developmentally informed approach, where I published a conceptualization paper defining creativity as a developmental resource rather than a performative end, challenging those ideas about creativity, where creativity regards the individual players' ability to make rare and varied decisions that might surprise the opponent, deceive the opponent, and create favorable game situations or create scoring opportunities for the teammates. So this kind of result-oriented or performance-oriented conception of creativity as something game decisive that only regards the best players able to deceive their opponent efficiently to create chances. I tried to develop a more inclusive approach where all players can be creative if you use the right task constraints and help the players explore new, unusual action possibilities and open-ended tasks. Then all players can exceed and expand their usual way of acting in the solutions that usually used during training can be challenged by using new kinds of task constraints, new kind of equipment, new kinds of coach behaviors that encourages the players to explore new things that might not work in the first few times. So it was, so engaging with this coach in the action research post, it was a balance between recognizing his views and trying to provide some new ideas for that helped him see that creativity is something that's not only for the offensive part of the game, not only in the last third, not only when it comes to creating chances and surprising opponents, but actually it's all part of the game and all part of all kinds of skills that could be worked on creatively.
Ludvig, can you speak a bit about the moments where you disagree then? Because I had similar experiences in my data collection where I found myself getting to the writing up of my findings or writing the conclusions and thinking I should have pushed them a bit more. I should have focused a bit more on the disagreement and explore it a bit more to try to see them, to try to help them to overcome these social norms and rules and so on. So can you speak a bit about your experiences there?
Yeah, for example, what I did, we had one season long where we planned to meet regularly, and I was going to bring some ideas for training activities, and I was going to bring some concepts, creativity-related concepts from the general creativity literature that we could use as kind of design principles to develop new activities. And I brought some tools and equipment, for example, some playing cards and some dices and some different things that could help us design new training activities. And one of the main things that we disagreed upon was that or that created some tensions was when we introduced some new tools, for example, the dices and the playing cards. When the players, when the coach could not imagine what would happen when using the things, that was kind of a barrier in terms of not wanting to, or not having the possibility in this context, because it's a high performance context with a lot of pressure on providing good results and making the players perform in each weekend. There was not time to engage in too much experiments in terms of not knowing what was going to happen when we did the exercises. And another thing was that there was a huge requirement for the activities we developed to be transferable to the final game of football, of soccer, football. So that should represent game situations and the actions and solutions the players explored during the activities. There was an idea that these should also be actions that would be relevant in the final game. And I came from a perspective where it was, in order to develop creative abilities and create a creative atmosphere and create a more open-minded, playful, explorative processes, then you need to do some things that cannot be done in a game. In order to develop some creative abilities, then you need to transgress this idea of representativeness somehow, and that created some debate in the process. I succeeded in persuading or arguing enough to help to that we tried something out with a varied success, and a lot of other ideas were discarded and was not included in the training sessions. But all these dialogues about what can be done and what can we not do was kind of really useful information in the analysis of the dilemmas and the barriers in the process.
I think that this is a very interesting finding, because a lot of the game-based approaches literature touches upon how the fact that playing games leads to creative behaviors. And I think that you're coming from a very interesting place of maybe challenging some of those assumptions, which reminds me to that we have an episode published in the past, I think season 2, with Ruan and Jose about game-based approaches that I invite our listeners to listen to.
Absolutely. Ludvig, with your PhD, before we get into, because there's 3 kind of main studies within it, before we get into those, was this about making more creative coaches or about having more creative players? Or was there an assumption that creative practices would, I guess, do both?
Yeah, well, that's a very important question, because I think that's 2 interlinked topics. I define it as coaching with creativity or coaching for creativity. When you coach with creativity, you try out new exercises, try out new coaching behavior, do change things. You're curious as a coach and try out new approaches, but those approaches don't necessarily promote players' creativity.
Yeah.
So when you coach for creativity, then you try to come up with new activities that help the players explore, develop, invent, attempt solutions that they don't normally use during training, in order to develop their creative abilities, or in order to provide creative experiences which are enjoyable, which help the players interact with each other in new ways. And there's a lot of arguments for why creative experiences are also important in a high-performance context, and in, of course, also in grassroots sports, where I'm focusing my research now. But the action research project was mainly to develop creative players but not creative players in the traditional perspective. At least that was my approach. It was more about developing their creative abilities, which are important for all players in terms of adapting to new and unexpected situations in the game and in their everyday life. And I think this approach was a little bit difficult for your coach to understand, and still myself as a still quite a green researcher at that time, it was also difficult for me maybe to explain for the coach in a way that made sense for him. And I should have been looking back. I should have been better looking back to help the coach understand why this could potentially also be important for the player's performance, because that's how coaches in a high performance environment think. I should have been better at that at that time. I think that might have reduced some of the barriers we experienced if I had some better way to argue for that. But you asked about I think I answered now, didn't I?
Yeah, of course. Definitely. So let's talk now a bit more explicitly around those 3 studies that you had for your PhD. So how did you actually promote this idea of coaching for creativity?
Yeah, well, I mentioned the first study a little bit before this conceptual study where I define creativity as the process of exploring new and unusual action possibilities in socially and materially situated activities, where creativity is about the player trying out new things, basically. It's about using open-ended tasks with different task constraints to help the players break their habits of action. So this is about the creative process. It's about seeing creativity as a way to act and seeing creativity as an interaction between the person and the environment, something that emerges in the situation based on the possibilities you have and the capacity you bring, which challenged the more cognitive, perceptual orientation of creativity, where creativity is mainly understood in terms of the creative abilities of the individual and the cognitive perceptual abilities in terms of noticing a free player, having a broad attentional field. And so it's developing more sociocultural understanding of what creativity is and how it can be developed by creating more creative environments where it's possible to explore new things. So that was the first study, was informed by scholars such as Chris Schilling and John Dewey, and then Vlad Glavaneux, which is one of the rising stars of the general psychological creativity research. And I was lucky to have him as a supervisor on my PhD. He was at Aalborg University in the beginning of my PhD, and then he moved across several other universities during my PhD time. But I had him as a supervisor. Was really a nice possibility to exploit his huge knowledge about this area, and to use some of his work to inform my work in sports. And he has really been a leader in terms of also developing the psychological perspective on creativity from what he defines as a I paradigm, which is more focused on the individual's creative abilities, to a we paradigm, where we're more focused on the environment, on the way we interact with the environment, and how we are creative in response to others' actions, and so on. That was the first study, was the conceptual one, and then the other study, second study in my PhD, was the case study of the local academy and the different conceptions of creativity. That was apparent in the interviews I did with the coaches, and then the third study was the action research study. So these studies informed each other back and forth, and they were like done in a continuous process. Not completing one, starting this one, completing that one, starting the third one. But it was like a huge mix of a lot of things going on at the same time. But it was overall it created a nice narrative across my PhD to both conceptualize what is creativity, to explore how does practice perceive creativity, why is the need for new approaches, and then trying out the new approach.
Yeah, and ultimately, after doing your PhD, what was your main kind of takeaway, like personally? Because you've spoken on the podcast about this journey from first experiencing creativity and trying to then take these generalized ideas into your own context. After doing 4 or 5 years of PhD study, for you personally, what was your kind of biggest takeaway around what creativity actually is and what it means for coaches?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, for me, the biggest takeaway was to continue exploring what are the potentials of working with creativity rather than developing more creative abilities, so to say. I think in the beginning of my academic career, I focused more on how can we do this to develop the creative abilities of all players, rather than where I'm now, how can we promote more creative activities and creativity nurturing activities to create creative experiences and use creativity as a means to create more joy, more safe and brave spaces where players thrive and meet each other in an open-minded way, to use creativity as a solution, so to say, to some of the challenges that we see in children and youth sport, where children drop out due to result-oriented practices, with controlling coaching and authoritative coaching, where the players have no say and have no autonomy over their choices. And so those, it's like how can we promote more sports participation and support player development by using creativity relevant practices and implementing them in practice was one of the takeaways. And then another takeaway for me in my PhD was that I really regretted not spending more time and focusing more on the player's perspective. That was where I started in the master thesis, by including the player's perspective on the new approach. I tried out, but the player's perspective was actually missing during my PhD. It would have been really interesting to talk to some of the academy players at the club where we did the action research, but I didn't get the chance to do so for various reasons. But so that's why actually after my PhD, I was lucky to get some funding from the Danish Ministry of Culture and to interview professional Danish ice hockey players about which role creativity had played in their career, how they had been creative in different kind of play context, practice context, and performance context, and to hear their perspective on why this was important for the development. That was an important part that I had neglected a little bit during my PhD, but was able to do during the COVID period with online interviewing and all those kind of things. That was nice to get that marked after the PhD.
Yeah, just going back to your first point around, I guess, moving it from a performance context maybe into how to win games necessarily and towards more of a participation thing. Is that why you've gone from maybe studying these elite football environment like you did for your PhD to focusing more on the grassroots? Is that because of your evolving understanding of creativity and its potential?
Yeah, it is. That's one of the arguments. Another argument is more like the conditions in academia in Denmark, at least. There's more possibility to get external funding for projects that are relevant for more people than just the elite players, if we can solve some of the challenges in terms of there's a mental well-being crisis for young people, and how can sports participation is an important aspect in terms of improving the well-being of young people, and can we use creativity promoting practices as a way to address this issue? Could be one way to at least get more support for funding, and then of course also if we can create more player-centered, autonomy supportive, mastery-oriented practices by using creativity nurturing principles in children's sports, then we might help parent coaches and youth coaches to put some brackets around the results that are for many coaches still impacting how they coach their players by selecting the best one for the games and having a more coach-centered approach to the way to coach the children. That's some of the ideas, at least.
Yeah. And as a result of the work you've done over the past, 10 years or nearly 10 years or so on creativity, am I right in thinking you developed some sort of model around what creativity is and the potential for it? Could you talk through that a bit?
Yeah, I can. It's based on some of Vlad Glavaneu's work. He published a paper several years ago called What Can Be Done with an Egg, where he introduced a situated model of creative action. And I developed on that and expanded on this model. So it has 4 components. One component is normativity. One component is materiality. One component is intentionality, and the last component is capability. So these 4 aspects together define what a given player do in a given situation. There are some normative expectations for the right way to behave or the right way to solve a given situations, based on, it could be playing styles, cultural values, social expectations for what is a good solution in this situation. Then we have some material conditions. We have a given configuration between the players in the situation. We have some certain materials, physical materials that are used in the situation. We have some conceptual material in terms of game principles or rules of the game we're in. On the environmental side of the model, then these aspects define what we should do and what we could do. But then on the player side, this model it shows that creativity is an interaction between the environment and the person in the situation, and builds on this definition of creativity as the ability to, or the ability as a process of exploring new and unusual action possibilities that I spoke about earlier. So on the player side, then we have the player's capabilities, which are the bodily, motoric, physical abilities of the players, which defines what one can do with one's body, but it's also representing the more mental, psychological aspects of what one thinks one can do with one's body in a given situation. And once the players' creative abilities in terms of their inventiveness and their flexibility and their fluency in terms of coming up with new ideas that are also impacting what they can do in a given situation, which ideas they can get and what they can do. And then the last component is the intentionality, which is the player's way to meet a situation. The players are always oriented towards something in the environment. They are either participating to have fun with their friends, or they are participating to win at all costs, or they are participating to explore new ideas, to challenge themselves. And the way the player is oriented towards the situation. It defines the way they perceive actions, possibilities in the situation, and the way they behave in the situation. If I'm there to win at all costs, I'm doing something. I will choose another action than if I'm there to have fun with friends, or if I'm there to challenge myself. So it defines the way we both perceive and experience a situation. And together, all these four components defines our habits, our usual way of behaving in a situation. So this is kind of what I'm using as framework to say that if we want to develop creativity, then we need to reduce the normative expectations of what is a good solution to make more room to explore new ideas that are not fitting to the normal expectations. And we can introduce new materials to help the players engage with the situation in novel ways. Use different kinds of ball sizes, ball shapes, playing in different surfaces, playing in different shapes, introducing new kinds of task constraints from the materiality side, helping the players engage with more curious, playful, spontaneous, improvisational action orientations, so to say, and then develop their creative abilities. And then these four areas, normativity, materiality, intentionality, and capability, are used as arguments for the different, as the theoretical background for the different ways I've developed to design creative activities. Together with some colleagues, we used the last 4 years to write some books in Danish, unfortunately, about creativity training in football, where we developed 10 learning goals as creative abilities you can promote by using different kind of activities, and defining also 10 different types of tasks that can be integrated in the design of creativity relevant training activities. And then a range of stimulation techniques, for example, these cues and words or pictures I told you about in the beginning. And this has informed the current project we are doing in children's football, where we have for the last few months 5 under-9 boys teams has been exposed to a creativity program we developed based on this model, based on the principles we developed in the books, to have a condensed information about what happens when using these kind of golden examples of creativity exercises, so to say. So that's been really exciting to follow these coaches and how they engage with this quite what do you say, elaborate training descriptions of these new training activities.
Absolutely. And where do you see that work going next? 'Cause obviously, you mentioned you're doing the work with the under-9s football at the moment. Is that something that you're going to publish soon, or in the next sort of year or so? And then after that, where do you see this creativity work going? And I guess a similar question for you, Manuel, as once Ludvig's finished. Like, where do you see, I guess, potentially both your work combining, or the work in general on creativity going in the future?
Yeah, well, we are hopefully going to publish some papers about it next year or the year to follow. I'm going to write a final report to UEFA, who funded this project, in a few months, and using that time also to engage more in the interviews. We did a lot of focus groups with the players from these teams and some interviews with the coaches to really have some more insights on what is the potential of doing this. But for me, the next step in this would be instead of choosing one team from a club to do something different, then it should be a more what could in school research. There's a new approach emerging that is called a whole school approach. I would like to engage in some projects where we can do a whole club approach. So how can we help clubs develop a an approach where creativity is something that is integrated across the different levels and age groups and teams in the club. What are the different ways you can work with creativity at different ages? What are the possibilities and barriers of doing it? What should coaches be aware of when engaging in this kind of activities? Instead of only having it as a like we did in the action research project in my PhD, where it was only the under 17 coach who did the new things, and all the other coaches were, what is going on at under 17s? What are they doing? This is not football. So creating a more holistic approach where more actors from the clubs are involved in terms of helping each other develop a way that creativity can be integrated in their particular context. So it's not a little bit of the one size fits all as in the UEFA project, but this was more to have a lot of empirical material on the children's experiences. And then hopefully, and I know that they will, some of the insights from the project is going to be used by the Danish FA, and in terms of developing coach education programs, where some of the principles and techniques from this UEFA project is going to be integrated. So that could also be a topic of interest for future research to follow coaches from education programs where creativity is a topic, and see what is the impact of this in terms of what they do and how it changes their practice. What do you say, Manuel? What is does this resonate with some of your ideas?
Absolutely. I think one of the many aspects that our work overlaps is in this attempt to uncover what are the contextual social norms that inhibit creative thinking. And so you speak write in your paper, the 2022 paper, that creativity contributes to the de-robotization of players. So there's something around the norm, the power of norms and history, and how much it stops individuals to think creatively. So where I went with it in my work was to frame then the process of gaining others' acceptance of new ideas as almost as a micro-political action. So what I would like to go next maybe is to further explore this idea of, in a way of, if you're trying to implement something new, something that breaks social norms, then there's a need to have some micro-political literacy to be able to do it. So maybe the next step then will be then to talk to coaches and educate coaches about micropolitics, not just for the sake of doing it or because it's part of our role, but also as a mean to implement some of these potentially new and creative ideas that we are trying to bring forth in our work.
Yeah.
Does this go back and speak to the point you made, Ludvig, about this whole club approach and needing someone with serious kind of cultural influence to say we want a creative learning or teaching or coaching philosophy for the whole club, across the age groups and across the different participation or elite levels?
Yeah, I definitely think so. If both coaches had more literacy, as you say, Manuel, on their way to persuade others in terms of understanding why this is important, and the club also provides the space and the encouragement to do so, then there would be more possibility to promote it for sure. And in Denmark, I'm not sure the same position exists in the UK, but the last few years the football FA has encouraged clubs to hire what is called children development coaches, and it's kind of a coaching supervision role, where the coach is the child development coach is responsible for doing an in-house education of the coaches, the voluntary parent coaches in the club, to helping form a game philosophy or some values in the club to promote development and to attract more players to the club and have a more and that's a really important role in terms of creating a culture organization where there's a possibility to try out new alternative approaches and ideas in the practice. So that's something I'm going to look into, how it's not necessarily focusing on the individual coach, but on people in roles in clubs that have more power in terms of what is going on in the club as a whole.
Yeah, and just before we kind of get towards perhaps your rant, Ludvig, we've spoken loads about creativity throughout the podcast, but I was just wondering if there's anything else you wanted to add to that argument in terms of, for the people listening, is there any kind of final words you had on creativity that would be good to leave them with?
Yeah, I think that one of the things we discovered in the UEFA projects was that people should be more open to try out things where they don't know what is going to happen and where they can't, maybe when thinking about the activity, imagine how it will work in the training. As an example, the way we recruited clubs for the UEFA project was by doing a demo training at our local academy, who has a lot of collaboration clubs in the northern region of Denmark, where the university is located, and they invite coaches into to a regional coach education program that is governed by this local academy to promote more quality in the coaching of children and youth across the region. And we had the possibility to have a creativity topic at that at this coach education, and we invited coaches in that could be potential participants in this project. And then we had a local team coming in with under 9 players, and I was coaching them, choosing some of the exercises from our program. And just before we went out on the pitch and I did these exercises with the children, I presented the exercises for the coaches, told them about what they should look after and what was my idea behind these exercises. And there was some skepticism. But when we came out to the field after the coaches had seen it, it was like, okay, that went much better than expected. I wouldn't have imagined this was possible. And that was actually an important step in terms of having coaches come on board and saying yes to participate in this project. So I guess my point here is that say yes and try out new things and see what happens. That's one thing. And then the other thing is have more trust in the players' abilities, in the players' creative abilities. Because if you find the right task constraints, if you find encourage the activities in the right way, then all players have the possibility to explore new ideas, come up with new solutions. It's not only those that have the best football-specific skills. Those players might actually be the players who have the biggest difficulties in terms of engaging in these new kind of activities, because they might rely on something they're just really good at in normal training. And if they have to come out of that comfort zone by doing the things they excel in, they might have some difficulties being exposed to suddenly being challenged to try things that they're not necessarily might be efficient or work. So that's another barrier we stumbled upon in the UEFA project, is that now the parents suddenly come to the coaches and say that my son came home from practice today and said that he wasn't the best. From a parent for a kid that is normally the best one. But again, there's a lot of we can talk about that for a long time, but at least the potential shows in the project. Some of the preliminary results shows that we can actually use creative practices to create a more task and mastery-oriented environment where the players, because they immerse and engage with the new challenges, they forget who scored the goals and who wins the games. Just an example to finish with is we have a huge dice in this program. If you want to see it, you can look at the YouTube video from the podcast. I'm trying to be a little bit commercial-wise here, but we have a big dice that's introducing some randomness in this program. And if we have an exercise called reload, where we put in the numbers from 1 to 6 on each side of this dice, and then from the players play 3 versus 3 plus 1 joker. Does that make sense in English as well?
We do the same.
Yeah. And then before the game, each player has to roll the dice, and the number they get is the number of touches they have on the ball or number of passes they have in the game. And when they run out, they have to go out to the sideline and turn the dice again to reload the number of touches or the number of passes. So they have to economize with what they do and really be reflective about how they engage in the game, and it influences how they interact with each other, and they engage in this task, and it's totally chaotic, and they do a lot of different things and forget about who won, who scored, but just immerse in the process of trying to solve this special task constraint. Just one example, and we have several more where they get different kinds of task parts with certain constraints that are specific to the given player. A lot of tools that could be filling a whole other podcast episode another day.
I think that's a very interesting point you're making about the yes ending, right? The yes and point you made before about this creative idea being an actual leap to the unknown, and that both coaches and athletes need to be comfortable with that. And what I found is that it is difficult for coaches to relinquish some of the control over the process.
Yeah.
Because they're taking this step they're unfamiliar with, and the element of novelty can be scary and daunting. And even the example you were saying now about the randomness, that just something simple as a dice can bring into a session. And you mentioned chaos, and coaches tend not to be comfortable with that. And I think that part of the job is also let's get them comfortable with that. And it's fine
I totally agree.
It's fine to relinquish control. So then you can finally bring some, we can foster the environment of creativity that you've been talking about during this hour.
I totally agree. And just a final example from the current project is another game format where we have developed some task cards based on, for example, international football stars, where we describe the playing style of Kylian Mbappé or some of the other well-known players that all players are familiar with. And we shortly describe their key competencies or the way they play. And then each player are divided a role card, and they need to try to mimic, imitate, or transform their normal playing style into becoming that player, so to say. And that helps them explore new things. And some of the players certainly did a back heel flip over and something that would never have happened during the game. But my point is that my colleague who were out observing this, one of these games at one of the clubs, he experienced that it was in the final 10 minutes of this session, and the parents started to come to pick up the kids after the session. And one of the parents started to yell instructions into his son: play him, do that, do this, like the typical joystick coach. But then the coach actually had the nice opportunity to go over to this parent and say, hey, you can't do that because they have special roles in this match, so no one can decide what they do. They decide themselves. And it was like, okay. And then this parent, it couldn't do anything. So it gives the coach some. It also helps the coach do that, actually. But that was just an example that might be expanded more on when we look more into the results.
Yeah, well, we look forward to seeing those results and hopefully published in English as well, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, Ludvig, it's been great to have you on, but just before we finish, let's get into your rant. As always, we ask our guests maybe to rant about a coaching issue or research issue that they have. Have you got anything in mind?
Yeah, well, I actually told we were there just before about try to do new things, because that's also a thing in research. I think that we should be more open to explore things from other disciplines and within our own discipline, to not be too siloed in terms of which knowledge we use in terms of what we do. And then for coaches, the same thing. I think the ramp was to say just do it. Try out to be more courageous in terms of trying out new things where we don't necessarily know how our players are going to solve the tasks, but then use it as a way to come up with new ideas or adapt the things we try out.
Yeah,
I think that's the takeaway. Yeah.
Brilliant, and what a great place to end. But Ludvig, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. We really appreciate it. And thank you all for listening as well. And as always, thanks to our sport coaching broadcast department as well for helping us produce this episode.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Cardiff Met Sports Coaching Hub podcast.
If you enjoyed the episode, leave us a rating and a review on your favourite podcast platform. If you're watching on YouTube, like and subscribe.
If you want to stay up to date with all of the latest work coming out of the Coaching Hub, please follow us on social media. All the relevant links are in the description.
And if you'd like to be featured in an upcoming listener special episode, drop us your questions to coachinghub@cardiffmet.ac.uk.